Right. Well, hello everyone. My name is Jake Wyman. I'm Communications Director for Idaho Freedom Foundation, and welcome to Capital Clarity. In honor of National School Choice Awareness Week, I'm happy to talk about today's Capital Clarity topic, implementing universal school choice here in Idaho. It's well past time to implement school choice. Government-run schools need competition, that is clear. While many teachers concern themselves with woke ideology and activism, our children's education suffers. According to the latest data, only 52.2% of our students were deemed proficient in English literacy, far below the State Department of Education's goal of 68.7%. What's worse, math proficiency was 41.5%, once again missing the goal of 61.1%. Luckily, there is a way we can improve this. It's time we grant parents more rights in their children's education and allow the money to follow the students. That brings us to our first speaker, an actual parent of a family that attends the Ambrose School, Ryan Spoon. Many know him as an online warrior for conservative issues, but Ryan was interviewed for a series we did in 2022 called Education Choice Stories, highlighting families who chose alternatives to public education for their children. As a follow-up, we have done an interview series this year with 6 different families from various education backgrounds. Here's a preview of the Spoon family. There we go. That series will be available on our website pretty soon here, so be sure to look for that. Without further ado, please welcome Ryan Spoon.
Thank you for having me, Jake, and Idaho Freedom Foundation. And I want to especially thank Idaho Freedom Foundation for the work they've done in this issue for many years, beginning with the Center for American Education and former Lieutenant Governor Janice McGeehan's Education Indoctrination Committee that she established back in 2021, I believe it was. And we uncovered a lot of things. COVID lifted the veil. There were a lot of things we suspected were going on in the public schools. We heard scattered anecdotes here and there. But when the children were moved back to the home and parents saw firsthand what was in their curriculum, what was coming from their teachers, we really lifted the veil for a lot of people on how bad the system had become. And I'm going to go ahead and ask my wife to come on up here. She just joined us in. My wife, Andrea, just arrived. She's pregnant with our 5th child, whose official due date is tomorrow. So she's a trooper. And as we mentioned in the video, our kids are at a classical Christian school. Jake mentioned that they're at the Ambrose School. I know many of you departed the public school system long ago, and people listening to this online departed the public school system long ago, or were never in it. Maybe you've been lifelong homeschoolers, lifelong private school. That is awesome. I want to request of all of us, me, you, that we are selfless about this issue of school choice. My kids are going to go to the Ambrose School. God has blessed us with those means, whether school choice passes or not. Many of you are going to homeschool or send your kids to private school, whether school choice passes or not. This is not about us. We already escaped this indoctrination system. I would like you to be selfless and think about the 95% of other school children that are still trapped inside the public school or think that they are hopelessly trapped inside the public school. Because if we don't get them out, it doesn't matter how good we educate our own children. Because if the next generation, 95% of the next generation of voters, is indoctrinated to be woke gay communist, then they're going to make it illegal for your children to homeschool your grandchildren or to send to private school because they will put on these burdensome requirements. We have to get those out or we will be overwhelmed by the tidal wave that is coming for us. So I would ask you, don't make this about you. If you see deficiencies in legislation that, oh, this doesn't cater to my need, if you're already out, put that aside. Think about the other people that would like to get out and feel that they can't, and figure out a way to help them. And let's also not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Right now, we're probably dealing with a tax credit, which generally means you're going to need the money in advance to pay for the schooling, or you'll need to come to some arrangement with the private school that your kids go to or covering those homeschool expenses, and you get it back in your taxes. And I recognize that that's difficult for people with less economic means. We will fix that over time. Let's get a certain percentage out, and then legislators will hear from 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 school children, their constituents with children that say, this legislation allowed our kids to get out, and we're thankful for that. And we will have momentum to then provide an outlet for the people that couldn't get out, that feel that they couldn't front those costs. Or you will see private organizations that set up scholarships or schools that have a scholarship program that allow them to collect that money midway through the year when these parents get their tax returns. There will be all sorts of solutions, but we would like to think that Idaho is the reddest of the red, that we're the most conservative state. I'm sorry to tell you that we are not. We do not lead on any conservative issue. We finally caught up on abortion and mostly on gun rights, but we are far behind. We will be the last Republican governor state in the nation to pass school choice. We might be the first Republican governor state in the nation to veto school choice. So we are behind. Let's realize our limitations on what we have in our legislature, realize that we have to take the good, not necessarily the perfect, but then we will have a built-in constituency that is benefiting from school choice that will push future legislators to expand this program to save everyone. So this might be something that helps our family. The main thing we need to watch out for is not what dollar amount is provided or when it's provided, whether it's in the front or the back or midway through the year. The main thing is we need to keep this so-called government accountability from ever touching our schools. And an important distinction to make is the difference between accountability, which is the way that the government controls the education system. You have to do it this way, because then we're stuck right where we are now. But if they simply have reporting requirements, and somebody mentioned earlier when I was chatting with someone who's working on this legislation, they said there might be a parent survey. The government doesn't say whether your survey responses are good or bad. You just submit the survey, and then you qualify for the tax credit. If you want to say, this is working for us, you still qualify for the tax credit. Or if you have to keep receipts just in case there's an audit. The government doesn't get to decide whether the curriculum behind those receipts suits them, whether you had enough LGBT teaching in there to suit them. That's not their business. Or if they say your private school has to be an accredited school, as long as they don't specify a list of approved accrediting agencies, okay, fine. But what we really don't want is for this ever to require submissions from the schools. If parents have to fill out a form, fine, you're filling out your taxes anyways, right? but we just don't want the government saying what you're allowed to teach. And if we have to compromise on dollar amounts now to keep that so-called accountability out, that's the sacrifice we should be willing to make. Let's let the dollars go for now, make sure that we keep the government out of our business, and then we can start to snowball and achieve parity with the public schools over time. That's my encouragement to all of you when you're evaluating this legislation. The priority, whenever government starts talking about accountability, that's the no compromise issue. But how this has helped our family, it won't change for our family. But like I said, it's not about us. It's about everybody else. Jake, did you want me to just hand it off to the next person or field questions or? Okay. Yeah.
Everyone, please, once again, give it up for Ryan Spoon. Our next speaker is Representative Clint Hostetler, who is currently serving in his first term for District 24A in Twin Falls. Clint has stated that he has decided to run for office to fight for the light of Idaho's liberty and traditional American values. This session, Clint has introduced a bill which takes a bold step towards a deregulated school choice here in Idaho, one of the boldest in the nation. To discuss it here today, please welcome Representative Clint Hostetler. All right. Does that work? Can you all hear me? All right. Hey, next time, can I go up before the tallest guy in the room? But thank you, brother. Congratulations, you extremist. Are you considered a domestic terrorist by the last administration after all that? Yeah. But congratulations once again, and thank you so much for that. And thank you once again to IFF and to everyone else who came up from Twin Falls or wherever else you're from to hear and just spend a little time considering what is kind of a polarizing issue today. Did anybody know that school choice is kind of polarizing, controversial? It's interesting how the most important issues are always the most polarizing and controversial, and of course school choice fits into that. The more research and conversation and debates that I've had through these last many months, I've only realized just how much it is in regards to controversial and polarizing. But today, I want to take a little bit of more of a helicopter approach on a few things before I just jump into the bill that we're discussing today, House Bill 1. We know that this issue is of utmost importance. How do we know that? Well, it's growing, and it's growing at an exponential rate. It's a train that's rumbling down the tracks of our nation, and you see that being that more than half of our states now, in some sort or fashion, are jumping into the school choice realm. What does that tell us? Anyone? What does that tell us that more than half of our states now are jumping into the school choice pool? We need it. Pardon? It's wanted. That's right. One, we need it. Why do we need it? Because our parents and our people want it, right? Something's amiss in the system that we have right now. And like I said, I believe it's controversial for many, many different reasons, and I won't go into all of them, but I believe it in the large picture, we are being presented with a false dilemma or a false dichotomy. On one side, you either want to blow up the public school system, right? And then all of our kids are going to be little Oliver Twists out on the street. Or on the other side, you want to continue to dump billions and billions of dollars into a system that is underperforming and doesn't really have accountability. And we know education is a valuable and essential institution here in our nation. And we know that there are millions of people who invest their lives and their time and their blood, sweat, and tears into this system and to our kids. And this is not an indictment on our teachers. It's not an indictment on the vast majority of those people who really care about our children and their education and the future of our nation. So I don't want many people to confuse the issue with that. Most of them that I've spoken with, and I've spoken with a lot, as I've said before, they have a genuine care and concern and compassion for our children. But there's some other bigger issues that are baked in
to our system here. And like I said, for the sake of time and our next speaker, I won't dive too far into that. But in having some conversations with teachers and parents and administrators, the blame is always shifted when we're talking about the public school system, and rightfully so, and it's easy to do that. I've had conversations with teachers that said the issue is with the hoops and the administration. We have to jump through new hoops to be credentialed each year. It takes away our focus from our children. I've heard I've heard teachers talk about parents. There's no accountability in the house. They're not getting the structure they need. They're not having the moral foundation or whatever it is. It could be phones. It could be television. It could be discipline. It could be a broken home. They come to school and these teachers are now having to play psychologist or therapist or just outburst maintenance, right? And then of course that affects the whole class. I've heard many talk about the bloated administrative aspect. Funding always comes up at the end of the day, right? You've got the urban to the rural. There's a big difference. But there is always some way to shift the blame, right? And a lot of the times it falls back on the legislators as we just need more money. Well, as Ryan alluded to, and I know Sam will jump into later, there's a lot of statistics that unfortunately denote a greater issue. When 50% of our kids cannot read here in Idaho at grade level, that's an issue. When 60% of our kids cannot do math at grade level, that's an issue. We're having a larger issue nationwide because we're begging for foreign workers to come in and fill these white-collar jobs. Why? Well, we're not getting our children where they need to be to fill these positions in our own nation, and that's scary to me. My beautiful bride over here, Danielle, and my son, Eli, he's homeschooled. It took a lot of prayer and convincing for a long time for her to stay home and leave a career. She had a master's degree. She left that to be a housewife. And then it took even more prayer and convincing for her to actually homeschool. And we left a state that shall remain unnamed as well. And we're here, but we're blessed, and I'm so thankful. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, all careers go to support the greatest career, and that's the housewife or the mom, essentially. And I really believe that. So really quick helicopter view, and I'll jump into my bill really quickly. Later, we're going to have time for questions. But there was a study recently done by the Heritage Foundation on the promising benefits, if you will, of school choice. Number one in this list of 10 is student safety. One of the top 3 reasons when parents surveyed mentioned they moved into the school choice realm is because of student safety. In Milwaukee, the research showed that school choice participants were half as likely to commit felonies and misdemeanors as their public school counterparts. That's a big percentage. Number 2, increased parental satisfaction and involvement. In Arizona, more than 70% of parents who use the program are satisfied. 3, it tailors to the student's needs, right? Even special needs, as it moves away from a one-size-fits-all system. Number 4, options for low-income families. Where you live, or if you can't afford to pay twice for an education, does not come into play. Number 5, you have higher graduation rates. Lower income DC program students were 21% more likely to graduate. Number 6, it saves taxpayer dollars. DC, once again, in their program, it produced a $2.62 return for every dollar spent on that program. Number 7, it puts pressure on public schools to perform, to bring in competition. It leads to better results in a system, as we talked about before, that obviously has some issues with accountability, competition, and results. 8, it makes all schools more accountable. Market-based education makes parents more of a stakeholder who have a greater leverage to affect the system and schools at large. Number 9, dollars go further. Parents and free market approach and competition always allows for the money to be spent more efficiently and go farther. And then finally, it cultivates citizens, better citizenship. Private schools do better at producing civic virtues within their students, producing an overall byproduct of a greater moral character and democratic values. So those are some big, heavy-hitting talking points, and I apologize, brother, if I took any of yours. But I really quickly want to talk about my bill. And like I said, I won't go too deep into it. How many people have looked at House Bill 1? Researched it? Okay. All right. Anyone not like it? Okay, great. So we'll have some questions that need to be asked and addressed, and this is the perfect place to do it. One thing I've always said is we have to keep the conversation open and civil. Why? Because it's an important one to have. Not everybody's going to be happy, and as my brother Ryan alluded to, it's not going to fit every single family perfectly, but we've got to maintain these conversations because as we see our school budget tripling and not proportionate to our growth in our state with results seemingly coming down, we've got an issue and we have to sometimes force the levers. I believe we are looking at a lot of institutions and systems in our society that have been built up as house of cards, and no one wants to get close to touch them because we're worried it's going to collapse. And so we want to just, hey, don't do anything. We don't want to do anything, but we need to force the levers. And sometimes that's the hard decision to have, but it needs to be made. And that's why it's important that we do discuss these things in a civil way and look at the statistics, the results, the numbers, and maintain that. But that being said, House Bill 1 is essentially the tax credit, if you will. And it is, like I said, I'll go loosely. I have the thing here, and I better not start looking at it because I'll get confused. But what it does is it sets a bar, a cap, if you will, of $250 million. And right away, people are like, whoa, that is a lot of money. You're a conservative. Why are we setting a cap of $250 million? Well, right off the bat, if the public school system is working and no one wants to move their kids out of it, none of that money should be moving out of our budget, right? The other issue is we're going to see some school choice bills that come down the pike that have a small, window of funding. And as parents come into that, it'll have to be revisited year after year as we see a movement out into these systems, whatever they are. So that's a big one. We wanted to make sure it give plenty of room for parents. And once again, if this were to open at 100% capacity, which seldom happens, if ever at all, in any of these systems, if we were to see that, then we would all have to realize there's a bigger problem in our public schools than we realize. Can we agree with that? So that being said, it gives a tax credit of cap at $250 million. A lot of people, when we look at it and do some comparisons with other states, which aren't always accurate, but we look like, and we're saying that the probably more accurate guesstimate would be anywhere between $40 to $90 million a year. Being that the case, 90 to high scenario if we had a specific amount of kids coming out. So for each person, it's a $9,500 tax credit. People go, wow, that's a lot of money. Well, does anyone know how much we spend per student in the public school system? I know you do, brother. How about you over there? No. It's over $11,000 per student in the public school system. So this is a $9,500 cap. So then we can say, wow, everybody's just going to go in and pull out $9,500. Well, first of all, you have to pay for your expenses, right? And we can address that later. There's lots of details. Once again, the funding matrix, the whole system we have, everything is a very complex matrix, and there are lots of facets to it. Once again, if you take an average of our private schools here in Idaho, we are looking at probably an average around $6,000 to $7,500 if it was private school expenses. I'd have to ask my wife, homeschool, what would you say our expenses are yearly? $1,000. So if someone wanted to and had the ability to pull their children out and homeschool, what would they pull back out after their expenses? Maybe $1,000. So there's a lot of nuances there. So what it does is it allows for that freedom and that opportunity. What it does not do is give the government any further authority to do anything, to change the creed, the curriculum, anything at all. We left homeschoolers out specifically because homeschoolers get nervous, right? Everyone's like, hey, just leave me alone, right? Those kids and those parents over there, they can do, figure it out yourself. But, and I'm not saying that's a horrible thing, but we care about our children. Who is best equipped? Who loves our kids the most? And who cares the most about their education and their future? The government or a system or our parents? I'm going to opt on the side of the parents. So this gives them the opportunity. If homeschoolers don't want to touch it, they don't have to touch it. But if they want to, they have an avenue to get some of their own tax dollars back. And I think one of the bigger also issues is we have to realize that this is our own money. I think there's another narrative that goes around that says, well, you're taking, the government's money or this, that, or the other. It's our money. And if parents want to educate their children how they see best, they should have access to their own money to do that. So essentially, that's the brass tacks. Another aspect, government doesn't have any opportunity to come in, regulate anything at all. They get no foot in your door. But the second aspect is this is removed or any sort of credentiality, right? I have two friends here recently, I believe one of them is going to come up after me, who could actually go into a collegiate setting and teach a teacher how to teach. But he can't go into Boise High and teach the students that teacher he was going to teach could teach. Does that make sense? That's kind of tough. I don't want the government giving out new credentials for parents or private schools because there is enough accountability, right? The free market always levels that out. And who gives out the credentials, by the way? Who's the one that credentials? The government, essentially, the same. So what would we have if by allowing government more accountability and adding credentials, we are essentially removing the choice by virtue. Government is now just dictating another school, right? And really governing that school. So that's essentially how this would work. There's some financial questions that a lot of people have about, this only gives rich people the ability to get their money back, so on and so forth. Well, once again, if you look at the free market, as you'd mentioned and alluded to, there will be private schools jumping over each other to be able to give opportunities for those parents to come in. And whether it's a contract, we see car loans and every other sort of financial system coming in to give people the opportunity to then have that receipt, to give that to the tax commission, to get their money back and move in. And there's some other options and some other aspects about this bill, but that's a helicopter view. And I want to leave some open to some questions because I'll bet you got some good questions. And essentially, that is the helicopter view of this bill. It is as clean as it gets. It allows the free market to start forcing the levers. And unfortunately, we're at a point where we can either go down the road we're going at and see where that ends up, or we can start making the changes that the vast majority of our states are starting to make and do what's right by our children. I think pretty much all of us would agree that we could go down the road we're going and continue to dump billions of dollars into this system. And which family wants to volunteer their children for another 12 years to see if that works out? I didn't, and I'm pretty sure I know you didn't. And it sounds harsh. Once again, this is not an indictment on the teachers, the millions of teachers, the administrators, the people in that system. This is just what, I hate to say, what you get with a bloated bureaucracy most of the time. And so the closest to the children is best. I'll leave you with this. My mom was a teacher for almost 40 years. She was a private school teacher, a public school teacher, even IDLA, special needs students. On the other side of that coin, my dad was a fiscal analyst for the Department of Health and Human Services in San Francisco for the federal government for years. He audited Head Start programs across the nation and later across the globe. I remember probably 30 plus years ago, he was auditing a Head Start program in New York. And if you're not familiar with Head Start, it's essentially, and I don't mean this in a negative way, kind of glorified babysitting, right? For those parents who have to go work, their kids go to the Head Start program, they get to color and they're fed. He told me at one point that the New York Head Start program per student, per child, was $25,000. At that time, that was a Stanford education. So here we have the two sides of this coin, okay? Where do we go from here? How do we move forward? We have to open the narrative. We have to be able to give the most stripped back opportunities and allow for the free market and parental discretion to be able to manipulate and move. And that's my thoughts. And I appreciate your time again. And I look forward to your questions. And thank you so much.
Once again, please give it up for Representative Clint Hostetler. So our next speaker, our final speaker, is IFF's own Samuel Lair. Samuel is currently our director of the Center of American Education, which aims to promote transformational change to our state and national education system so that it best serves the families and students who utilize it. Samuel graduated from the University of Nevada, Reno in 2018 with a BA in political science and is currently a PhD candidate in politics at Hillsdale College, where he is writing a dissertation on the political thought and statesmanship of James Monroe. Please welcome Samuel Lair.
Thank you, Jake, Ryan, Clint, everyone for coming out here today. You'll have to forgive me. I'm going to give you a small civics lesson, but it's with my degree from Hillsdale came a mandate that I have to quote the founding fathers whenever I have an opportunity to. So I'd like to touch on something that Ryan pointed out, and something that I think is usually left out when we talk about school choice, and that is the selfless nature of this policy. Usually when people say we need school choice, they come from it from a very selfish perspective. This will help decrease my taxes. This will help my children. And while that's true, it's also good for society. And it promotes what the founders called the common good. Our founding fathers were some of the biggest patrons of education that have ever existed in human history. Thomas Jefferson helped found the University of Virginia. Benjamin Franklin helped found the University of Pennsylvania. And in constitutions across the founding period, they included requirements by the legislature to provide for education for the citizenry. I have an example for you from the New Hampshire Constitution of 1784. It might sound familiar. Knowledge and learning, generally diffused through a community, being essential to the preservation of a free government and spreading the opportunities and advantages of education through the various parts of the country, being highly conducive to promote this end. It shall be the duty of the legislators and magistrates in all future periods of this government to cherish the interests of literature and the sciences in all seminaries and public schools. New Hampshire's Constitution also has another addition, which I like to see Idaho adopt one day, which is to encourage private and public institutions. Again, you see this in other documents from the founding period as well. Northwest Ordinance, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall be forever encouraged. And finally, in our own Constitution here in Idaho, the stability of a Republican form of government, depending mainly upon the intelligence of the people, it shall be the duty of the legislature of Idaho to establish and maintain a general, uniform, and thorough system of public free common schools. The common thread throughout all these provisions and all the constitutions and ordinances is this notion that self-government depends upon a moral, intelligent, and self-governing people. To have self-government, you have to be self-governing, correct? While I think our framers and our founders of Idaho had good intentions, they cannot foresee 150 years of aggressive infiltration to our public school system. I think it's important to recognize where they have failed, but also try to reclaim the spirit of what they wanted education to be, and that's preparing students for self-government. Now, there's three general virtues, that I think are necessary for self-government that our founders believed that education should provide. Moral virtue, civic virtue, intellectual virtue. And to put those into brass tacks, moral virtue, you're a good person. Civic virtue, you understand what Jefferson called your rights and duties as citizens. You understand the Constitution, what it means to vote, what it means to participate in our democracy. And finally, intellectual virtue. You have to be able to read, right? You can't understand the arguments that are going on in a political realm if you actually can't read those arguments. It is my position, and the position of many here today, that our public school system, contrary to the mandate provided by the Constitution of Idaho, does not abide by any of these standards. Take moral virtue. This is policy 3281 from Bonneville School District. The Bonneville Joint School Board of Trustees believes in fostering an educational environment that is safe and free of discrimination for all students. Here's the kicker: regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. They then go on to define gender identity as a person's deeply felt internal sense of their own gender. A person's gender identity may be different from or the same as the person's sex assigned at birth. Then go on to define gender transition, the process in which transgender individuals begin asserting the sex that corresponds to their gender identity instead of the sex they were assigned at birth. During gender transition, individuals begin to live and identify as the sex consistent with their gender identity, may dress differently, adopt a new name, and use pronouns consistent with their gender identity. Transgender individuals may undergo gender transition at any stage of their lives, and gender transition can happen swiftly over a long duration of time. Now, I don't know about the people here in this room, but I don't think that our public school system should be encouraging our students to be committing self-harm. They should understand that there's only two genders, and they should be encouraging them to go into this new recent fad that they can be whatever they want to be, whether it be a giraffe or a cat or a man or a woman. No, God gave us two genders, either a man or a woman. There's Adam and Eve. And you shouldn't be encouraging students to harm themselves and defying the laws of nature and of nature's God. Civic virtue. What Jefferson, as I said, called our rights and duties as citizens. Well, this June, the Department of Education, along with Boise State University, is holding a symposium for social studies instructors here in Idaho, public school teachers primarily, and they're to honor the 250th anniversary of our revolution. Good, right? It sounds like this is a good patriotic moment to represent what our founding principles are. Well, let's look at the keynote speaker, Tara Boutin from the University of Maryland, whose talk is Broken by Design, the Undemocratic Origins of American Democracy. And in this speech, he's going to talk about how the founders were primarily motivated to establish our Constitution in order to protect, quote, their power and privilege. Among the things that he is concerning, that he thinks needs to be eliminated from our Constitution, is the Electoral College and the structure and operation of the Senate. These are the things that the Department of Education wants social studies teachers to be teaching your children. Is that understanding the Constitution? Is that understanding our founding principles? I don't think so. Now, lastly, intellectual virtue, or what our Constitution calls intelligence. Ryan and Clint pointed out some of those metrics, right? ELA proficiency, according to ISAT, which is a standardized test they do, 52% of students can read, meaning 48% of them cannot read at grade level. 60% of them cannot do math at grade level, and only 79.9% of them are graduating on time. And there's a point in here that I want to point out. The graduation rate is 80%, the reading rate is 52%, and the math rate is 41%. So not only are we not graduating kids, the kids that we are graduating do not have reading comprehension. And I've taken the pleasure to go through and actually go, okay, fine, what does it mean to be proficient in reading? Well, I've gone to the Department of Education, I've looked at what their proficiency standards are, and the high bar, the high standard that they're unable to reach is being able to make an argument about what you just read, aka having basic reading comprehension. Again, if you cannot read, how are you going to have a job? How are you going to understand even just how to be a citizen in the United States? How can you actually engage in civil public discourse for the health of our republic? Again, the NAEP scores that came from the national government just came out last night, and they paint even a bleaker picture. 31% of 8th graders are proficient in math, meaning 70% of 8th graders are not proficient in math. 32% are proficient at reading, meaning 68% of them are not proficient at reading. By the way, that is down from 39% in 2017. So, our public schools, they say, our Constitution, intelligence is necessary for a Republican form of government. From what I see, our public schools are not ensuring our students are moral. They're not ensuring that they understand their Constitution, and they're not ensuring that they understand basic foundational knowledge that you need to exist in this society. So what are the stakes here? Our Republican system of government, the American way of life as we know it, cannot survive if the next generation does not know their gender, their Constitution, or their ABCs. So, what is school choice really about here? Yes, it saves money on education spending. Yes, it ensures a quality workforce. Yes, it makes sure that students are better prepared for college. Yes, it improves test scores. It does all of those things. But more fundamentally, school choice is about creating the environment where better schools can be established that you can send your kids to ensure that our Republican government exists and continues to preserve for future generations. If you care, thank you. If you care about the future of our country, if you care about restoring our constitutional system of government, if you care about preserving our fundamental liberties, then you should care about school choice. So now, with all that said, what is school choice supposed to look like now? Well, Clint touched on some of the fundamentals, and so did Ryan. School choice has to be sufficient, it has to be universal, it has to be deregulated, and it has to be transparent. In other words, you cannot impose the public school's failing model of accountability on private schools and expect different results. If all we did was privatize the public school model, school choice would be an utter failure. And this is a point that every other Republican state, including President Donald Trump, has recognized. I'd like to read from you an executive order issued by our president last night regarding freedom in education. He says, "Parents want and deserve the best education for their children, but too many children do not thrive in their assigned government-run K-12 school. According to this year's National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, the scores that I mentioned to you, 70% of 8th graders are below proficient in reading, and 72% are below proficient in math. Moreover, geographically based school assignments exacerbate the cost of housing in districts with preferred schools, straining the finances of millions of Americans' families, sacrificing for their children's futures." The president recognizes that universal school choice is a necessity for our Republican form of government. 12 other Republican states recognize that universal school choice is a necessity for our society. It's time for Idaho to recognize the necessity of universal school choice. Now, we have 3 bills here that are currently floating around in the legislature on this topic. House Bill 1, which you've heard Clint present, House Bill 39, which is probably going to get a new designation because it was revised this morning by Representative Wendy Horman and Senator Lori Den Hartog, and then Senate Bill 1025, sponsored by Senator Lent. There's some major differences between these bills that I want to briefly touch on for you, and then we can move on to questions where you can ask us about Clint's bill, and the bills that are here, and what we mean by transparency, what we mean by universality, what we mean by accountability. So, Clint already touched on House Bill 1. Just to give you some breakdowns on House Bill 39. House Bill 39, like Clint's bills, are a refundable tax credit. One of the first differences is the maximum award amount. So, whereas Clint's bill is $9,500, House Bill 39 is $5,000. The same with Senate Bill 1025 is also $5,000. The other 2 bills are also capped at $50 million. So based on my estimates, Clint's bill would serve about 36,000 students, and then House Bill 39 and 1025 would serve about 10,000 students. The initial draft of House Bill 39 excluded homeschoolers. I'm not sure if that's the case with the current bill. And Senate Bill 2025, like Clint's, is universal. But there's a caveat on that one, and it's sunsetted to 2030. So you can have universal school choice, but you can only have it for 4 years. The other difference is the regulations. And this is really where the meat comes, which is the kind of theme we've touched on here, that these regulations are not what we want. So one issue is means testing, right? How do we give access to everybody so everyone has access to school choice? Clint's bill has no means testing. House Bill 39 has a more understandable amount of means testing, but still not ideal, where it just gives priority to families making less than 300% of the federal poverty level. If you do that math, it equates to about $74,000 a year, which is more or less equivalent to the $76,000 median household income in Idaho. And that's essentially, if you apply at the same time as someone who makes below that amount, they'll get priority consideration over you. Senate Bill 1025 has caps for what percentage of the awards can go to what income bracket. 75% is withheld for people making under $60,000, 20% between $60,000 and $80,000, 5% over $80,000. Regarding requirements on public schools, House Bill 39, which is the least intrusive, at least in the current iteration, has some core subject requirements. And it also has, I think in the new version, some accreditation requirements as well. Senate Bill 1025 has accreditation requirements, has reporting requirements, it has testing requirements. It also imposes a number range of provisions otherwise required from public schools onto private schools. Parental discretion over education expenses is another important topic here. Should parents have the first say on what is considered education, or should the government have that say? House Bill 39 and 1025 do not give very much discretion to parents over their education expenses. They're pretty strictly delineated on what is and is not included. Another one is whether it prohibits government control over non-public schools. Clint, as he mentioned, has explicit provisions that prevent government from encroaching on private education. House Bill 39 has similar provisions, which is positive. Senate Bill 1025 does not have that, unfortunately. As well as limiting the scope of government. One thing to keep a note with Senate Bill 1025 is it's an expansion of the existing Empowering Parents grant. And it also includes kids under the age of 3 in pre-K. So it's also kind of expanding education choice to childcare, which is something that is a choice, to put it, politely. Then lastly, the sunset provision, which I mentioned in 1025. That is the state of of universal school choice in Idaho right now. It's unclear which one of these are the favorite to pass. It's unclear which one has the clearest path to being passed, and that's where everyone in this room comes in. We've laid out what the basics are, what education should be, what universal school choice should be, and we're here now to provide you with the basics of what the bills are, and you guys need to decide, do you want universal school choice that prohibits parents from choosing what is and is not considered education? Do you want school choice that imposes unjust government regulations on private schools? Do you want school choice that actually is applicable to everybody or only a limited select few? That's up to you to decide and inform your legislators on. I'd be happy now to answer any questions regarding House Bill 39, Senate Bill 1025, or what the Idaho Freedom Foundation believes school choice needs to be in order to take our education system to the heights that it deserves to get to. Thank you.
So really quick, we'll have Ryan and Clint also up here answering the questions. And for the answers here, please repeat the questions briefly and then answer it for people at home. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I support choice. And I think all of you have laid out significant arguments against that's what I said. But what is the objection on the other side of the coin? What's the beef? What are they trying to do? Why not do this?
Yeah, please.
So I think it's important to understand that there's an entire kind of grift system around the public education system that expands beyond just teachers in public schools, right? There are interest groups that are employed directly by the public schools, right? There's obviously the teachers' unions, but there's also the universities that provide the certifications for the teachers. There's also the textbook companies. There's also the accrediting agencies. There's also the non-government organizations that try to push this curriculum or that curriculum. If you open the market up for anybody to open a school and for children and families to choose the school that works best for them, that monopoly that they all benefit from goes away. That's the easiest way for me to put it. Mm-hmm.
universal school choice. My challenge is we are not being taught life enough, and you're going for the low bar and not the high bar. Once the bureaucracy gets going, it's hard to get it going, to get it changed. My challenge to you would be to redo this bill, is what I'm asking, and to do it so that the money follows the students. Because right now, people, especially Democrats, think this is a very elitist bill because only 8% of the people that will be able to pre-home. Now, as a national board teacher, I worked in Title I schools for over 23 years. My students would not be able to qualify. And to be honest, not all the students and parents would be able to find the resources. So my urging to you is that you're not going far enough. And I would scrap this bill because you're not, you keep on saying universal, but it's not. 8% is not the 92% that you left out. So I would urge you to start again and do it correctly at the full 100% with the money following.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. That's great. I agree. One thing I have had is a lot of parents are happy with their kids in public school, and they won't move. I get a lot of calls from people that says, "Hey, public school's doing just fine for me. We don't want to leave. We're in a rural area. We don't have private schools to move to." And so what this does is it sets the groundwork moving forward. It is the most clean, so it gives us the opportunity to see right off the bat, we're gauging, right? Who wants to come partake and enjoy 250 million versus the 50 gives us a gauge to see how this moves. And then of course we can move from there, but anybody has the opportunity in regards to applying, not meaning that government's picking and choosing which children or family get to qualify. That's in regards to universal. It's the most clean because instead of us trying to allocate money up front to people, which could be considered welfare or however, based on how much taxes they pay, this gives the free market the opportunity to create those opportunities to go after that money to give parents options that work for them. And then once again, down the road, we can either expand that or add options to provide some sort of an avenue for people. But it is, once again, the most limited and stripped down. I hope that was a long statement, so I hope I'm addressing quickly. And once again, it's hard to address these bigger ideas and concepts with just a couple talking points.
Can I get just a minute?
Yeah, please do.
Laura, I think the short answer is that everyone in this room agrees. So the problem is we have a major obstacle, and that obstacle is called the Idaho legislature. We don't have the votes to do that truly universal school choice. I wish we did. We did ESAs for 2 years in a row. ESA bills were proposed to the legislature in 2022 and 2023 and went absolutely nowhere. We ran a very expansive tax credit bill in 2024, also didn't get very far. So we're scaling back to the point where, well, maybe if we make it small enough and restrictive enough and light enough on the public school system, maybe it'll pass this time. But in order to get our foot in the door and have 10,000 students that participate and 10,000 students more that didn't qualify because we ate up the allocated money, then we can go back to the legislators and say, your constituents want this. You have all these people that used it and loved it, and you have just as many more that couldn't use it because you didn't allocate enough money. And this will become a driving issue that will change the minds of the legislature when they're being driven by their own constituents. But right now, they're being driven by the teachers' unions. And the teachers are great, but it doesn't matter how motivated and hardworking and sincere a teacher is when they are bound by the corrupt and bloated and inefficient and twisted liberal system that is the public school system. Yeah.
Can I urge you to do a change on the bill then that people who are working
Yeah, once again, I think this microphone actually looks better. Once again, it's one of those things we want it to be as clean as possible. And to start implementing a pre-funding option just changes the whole dynamics. Once again, when you get government out and you let the free market figure these solutions out, it's why we have so many different options for loans, right? People want to sell cars, right? A lot of people don't have $50, $60, $70, $80,000 to plunk down for a truck these days. But once again, we have to see what this unfolds as. We have to be able to keep it as clean as possible moving forward. And I guess another reality is that my bill was filed as a personal bill. Many people don't think that's important, but it is because I knew exactly, as Ryan alluded to, the legislature's not ready for it. Many of the parents aren't ready for it. And I'd love to take one of your questions as well. We have to start showing results. We're just now getting results across the union about school choice. People were all up in arms about Arizona and the funding and the over implementation, if you will, or enrollment. But now we're seeing that it's actually saving the state's money. I have people still saying that it's costing them and bankrupting them, but people don't understand the statistics. They're hearing these narratives. We've got fear over here and fear over there. So we really have to be able to unfold this in a wise way. We are doing the incrementalism way, which is completely opposite to what you are saying. And once again, we all agree, and everybody would sit here and say, we all want the best for our children. We all want school choice. We just differ on the avenue to get there. And so we have to have the most stripped down version, I believe, the most free market version, I believe, to where we can now start to buttress and move in the right direction. How much funding? Who gets it? How they get it? Does the free market supply these options? Does government have to step in and now, provide grants? Things of that nature. So it's a big issue, and I hear exactly what you're saying. But if no one minds, I don't mind. I'd love to get your question real quick. Yes, it's. Go ahead.
I want to take a quick moment to add a clarification to that. Every school choice bill that's been enacted in this country from all 12 states, other than Florida with a kind of weird caveat, that's a whole other ballgame, is an appropriation. So do that what you will. So I just want to make sure that we're all kind of operating from the same knowledge pool here.
But yeah, feel free.
But go ahead.
Yeah.
So that's a very great point, and it's a concern that a lot of voters have. And I think it's important to note here that, we are constrained sort of by the Constitution of Idaho that requires the continual funding of public schools, right? So that money is always going to go to public schools because it's Constitution required by the legislature to do so. It's important to understand here that there will be savings of money with universal school choice, but it's a second-ordered effect. So without going too much far into the details of how the school funding formula works, but money is allocated to school districts based on their enrollment, right? If enrollment goes down, there's going to be less money going to the public schools because they're not teaching the same amount of students as they were before. In fact, enrollment's already on the decline in Idaho. With school choice, essentially, since it's less money, right? $9,500 for Clint's bill, $5,000 for the other two bills that are going to the parents that would have choose school choice as opposed to going to the public school, which is $11,000, as we said. You're actually saving money over time. It's going to take a little bit of time. Like the first hit is going to be significant because you have to deal with the current private school and homeschool population, right? But at the same time, you're also dealing with new people leaving the public school system and entering private schools and entering homeschools, right? So the long-term effects will be, I think, an overall reduction in education spending, which you've started to see in places like Arizona. Contrary to what they say, the Goldwater Institute did a study actually. They like to point out like Arizona is costing $700 million. Like, look at this massive growth of government. Well, if you actually look at the numbers, they're actually starting to save money overall. Again, it's just one of those things that's going to take time, and it's a second-order effect that will take multiple years to see through. Does that make sense?
For the same reason as Lori's proposal. We would love to do it this way. We would love to have a one-for-one withdrawal. Someone uses school choice, that dollar comes out immediately from the public school system. And we've tried it for 3 years in a row, and we've got blocked every time. And the governor, if you listen to his State of the Union speech a few weeks ago, he drew a line in the sand. He said, I won't support any school choice program that takes a single dollar from the public schools. And that's the obstacle that we have, is the current legislature and the current governor. So we can continue to propose the perfect solution and to continue to get absolutely nothing for it. No, it won't. No, because as those students leave the public schools, the enrollment decreases, and it's usually a 1-year lag because they're going to be initially enrolled on the books in a public school, then they exit, and then their enrollment will be reflected the following year, and the funding for that school that they left will decrease. And I think, Fred, this may have been what you wanted to speak to. Was that true?
Yeah, I'll speak very briefly. Fred Burnell, kind of known as the numbers guy. So fundamentally, using both. Complex. Okay. So we appropriate over $3 billion for public schools. And as both of everyone really spoke to, a couple things. If you do an ESA, an education savings account, that is more programmatic. It's obviously going to use the Department of Education. A tax credit that allows people to keep their tax money, I don't think you'd call a program. I mean, it's not. It's basically any more than the grocery tax credit is a program or the multitude of tax credits or programs. Now, as to the issue of should the dollars go one for one, schools have fixed and variable costs, right? They're going to have to heat the building, unless everybody leaves, no matter what. So the funding formula is tied to attendance. And as they both said, over time, if attendance declines, money does leave the system. That is the core reason why the system is so opposed to it, because they think over time they're going to lose money. Yeah, and so that's the fundamental. In terms of your point, just give people $11,000 back. There's a lot of complexity, because if somebody's not in the system right now, okay, you provide the tax credit. If someone leaves the system and you get this either $500 or $9,500, the way the formula works, it's going to take a couple of years to reflect that. So if you just pulled it out year one, they're not going to just fire the janitor or turn off the lights and the heat. So what this essentially is creating parallel systems. There's a constitutional responsibility to fund a public system. The point of this, the tip of the spear, is for those parents the current system is not working for, to give them an opportunity to use private schooling or homeschooling to the extent that they're not doing it now because they can't afford it. If you can't afford it, you don't have any options but the public school. And if you're not able to homeschool your kids, maybe both parents work, you basically have no option. So this is option A. There's not a state other than the Florida model mentioned that has just said we're going to take a pipe from the bucket that funds public schools and drain it dollar for dollar. Everyone else is taking it from the tax revenue bucket above. And that is how the process has worked in all other states. Again, Florida is a bit of a hybrid. So those are your options now. Either you don't do it, or you do it in a way where the primary effect is to help the parents who can't currently afford private options. And then over time, just to the extent parents migrate, to the woman who said, well, why not create the option for 300,000 students? Every state that has done this, there's a slow take-up rate. 300,000 people won't leave the public system. So this bill, Representative Hostetler's bill, is actually very generous relative to the experience of take-up rates in other states. So if you take 250 million and you divide it by 9,500, maybe the average use is 8, you're in the 30 or 40,000 student range. That cap will actually exceed what we've seen in other states, the exodus of people in years 1 to 3. Is it a solution for 10 years from now? No. But it absolutely would be an umbrella that would cover the early switchers from the public system.
It's also good to remind you this isn't giving bureaucracy. It's not giving government any extra new power. This is essentially giving the free market the opportunity to work. So it's not expansion of government. It's an initial expansion of spending. Once again, you can get into the other issues. If it's going to save money in the long run and it's going to create competition and results, it's worth it. We do have a constitutional obligation. And if we're getting better results for less money over time and the parents the right to choose and create systems that work, that's what we're going for. But we have built up this system and this institution and this kingdom for so long, and we're scared to get close to it, right? But what about this? What about that? What about that? We're afraid to do the important things up front like this. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your patience, by the way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So the thing that I wanted to mention was, like we said, we would love to go 1 for 1. Somebody takes school choice, we deduct that from the public school money. We're not able to do that. The other thing on just giving people their taxes back, I don't know what the exact figure is for Idaho, but a couple years ago, there was a statistics that 47% of Americans do not pay any income tax. And so you can't give them their money back because they aren't paying it already. They're already getting all of it back. So you can't give them more than what they're already paying. This is actually a refundable credit that would give them back more than they're paying. But again, it goes to that principle that We are required by the state constitution to provide this funding. I would love to have a conversation of whether it's appropriate or not for the state to be involved in the funding of public schools. That's a very interesting conversation. But we don't have the votes to change the Idaho Constitution. If you can change it to where we do, more power to you. I'd love that. But we don't. So what we're having a conversation about is whether or not the state should be involved in the operation of education. And if you're trying to divert from that conversation, you're simply not living in the reality in which we live.
Take it over here.
Hey, I'm so sorry, everyone. We're 15 minutes over. So, thank you for all your questions. Really good questions. If Sam may be out in the hallway if you want to ask him any more questions, but that will end today's Capital Clarity. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Please give it up for everyone who decided to speak today. And please join us next Thursday at noon to hear from Representative Cornell Razor and Representative Josh Tanner on state sovereignty. Thank you.